Hello and welcome to the third episode of The Gist of It. Today we're going to be commenting or summarizing a talk which I think can be interesting for basically every single web developer. But first, we wanted to tell you something that we forgot to tell in the previous episode.
Yes, so as we teasered at the end of the first episode actually already, how to reach us. And then in the second episode, we sadly completely forgot to tell you how to do so. So the main thing that you can do is visit our website, gist.fm, that is gist.fm, where you find a short description about our website, about our podcast, and links to the podcast platforms that you can find us on, although we're on pretty much all of them, not only the linked ones. And furthermore, you can find links to our social media, which is LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Please follow us there to always receive the latest announcements and episodes. And finally, you can also reach us by email. So that's mail@gist.fm. And what we ask you is, please, if you have some, send us feedback over any of these channels that you'll find on our website. Since we would be very happy to receive some. So that's gist.fm. But now let's start with the topic. So today's talk is called HTTP Headers for the Responsible Developer. It was held by Stefan Judis at the GOTO Conference Series in Berlin in the year 2019.
During the talk, he shows us some headers that might be interesting for certain reasons, which I have to say most of them I didn't know.
No, me neither. Some are I think well known, but 2 out of them maybe, and the rest I would think all of you also never heard of. I mean, if you're very much into front-end development, then maybe, but otherwise they're more exclusive, rare ones.
Yes. So now we are gonna walk you through the talk.
Exactly. So he starts out with explaining that, well, he was born in the 80s, and he first became a sound engineer, but then in 2010 he realized that he actually wants to do web development, and since then he's a web developer. One important first point I think that he makes is that for many features and the way that websites and web apps are built nowadays, it's a classic like chicken egg problem. So you cannot say anymore, our site is not built for this type of user, because if you don't do that, then these users will never show up anyways, because, well, they cannot really use your site for whatever reason, or it looks not good or it's unusable. So you'll see in your analytics, okay, from this kind of viewport, from this kind of part of the world, we have no users, but maybe it's just because you didn't optimize for that. So that's already an interesting takeaway.
Yes, the conclusion of that is that we are building for everyone. So we have to take care of certain aspects of our websites or whatever we are building to make it accessible for everyone. And in particular, during the talk, the focus is on the network.
Exactly. So as the title of the talk says, in the 40 minutes that the talk is long, Stefan essentially goes over various HTTP headers and how they can be used to do 3 things, which I found very nice that he pointed out so nicely, which is to make the web safe, affordable, and respectful. So let's jump right into it. The first one that he makes is that still very many sites nowadays do not use HTTPS, which is a pity, as I think everyone can agree. So the first one he shows us is the strict transport security header, which does one fairly simple thing. It uses, a standard that is also of the same name, HSTS, HTTP Strict Transport Security, which essentially tells the browser, so it's a response server-sided header, tells the browser to force to use HTTPS.
Yeah, he explains some of the options or attributes that you can add to this header. And in particular, one called Preload that directly doesn't try to do any kind of request that it's not HTTPS.
Exactly. And the interesting thing about this is that you can submit your website that has this preload option in this header to a site that all the major browsers read out, or yeah, it's like a database essentially. So in the source actually of Chromium, Firefox, Edge, and so on, they ship huge lists nowadays that essentially contain this domain name supports HSTS Preload, which does one simple thing that if you visit such a page, it immediately tries with HTTPS instead of regular HTTP. And the example that he gives, which I think is a very good one, if you're on a slow connection, this already saves you one request, which might take a second, 2, 3, which is just, I hit it with HTTP and it tells me 301 or 302 status code. No, I don't support HTTP. Please try again with HTTPS. So you save this initial hop, which is already very nice for your users because site seems to load faster.
Yes. After explaining how this works, he does something that does all the time during the talk, which I liked and I appreciate very much, which is saying, okay, there's this header with these options that exist, but it is actually supported by the main browsers that are there.
Or not.
Or not. But like, it's not just this exists, but it actually, you can use it and can be used by your users.
Indeed. He has, I think, 2 that are still fairly experimental, but actually all of the rest are shipped and built into all the 5 major browsers. So you can already start using them right after this listen to this podcast, actually.
Yes.
So yeah, the next one that he goes over is which one?
Well, it's the header content security policy, which has an option upgrading secure requests to do that, this upgrade automatically.
And furthermore, what you can do is you can define from which domains several things can be served. So in your first initial response from your server, you say to the client, to the browser, okay, these MIME types, so for example, JavaScript, please only execute if it comes from the following sources. So for one simple example is you can essentially block third-party JavaScript with this completely. So you can say everything that's not from mydomain.com, whatever the domain is, I just not even try to download it. So it will not even start to fetch the resource. And that works for every MIME type. So you can also restrict images, videos, whatever. Other options are you can say iframes, for example, can only be served from the following domains and not, and so on and so forth. So you can restrict where your website gets its resources from.
One downside of this is that it allows inline JavaScript execution because, well, it is needed for some aspects. But this can be managed since you can like set your JavaScript execution
JavaScript scripts, I guess. Yeah, it's a
yes.
shitty term.
As in a whitelist using the hash code of your script. So it only executes your JavaScript.
Yes. So you can make it even more restrictive, essentially. But still be able, indeed, as you said, to allow inline JavaScript that is just not served from somewhere, since that's not coming from a domain, strictly speaking. Yeah.
Yes. One point made at the end of this section, let's say, is that this, although it's very nice and useful to manage the security of your site, it's not really used. It's only used by 6% of the biggest sites.
Yes. And another thing that I found very interesting here, this is one of the main things you can actually enable as the website owner, server-sided, to restrict these popular things that I think all of us heard in recent years, that some third-party scripts out of even like ads or something served some JavaScript that then started mining Bitcoins or something. So even the owners of the websites, they just had some ads from somewhere. And I mean, they're dynamic, of course. So some users got ads that had Bitcoin or Monero, some whatever cryptocurrency mining JavaScript in there. So even as the site owner, you're not really responsible and you didn't know this. And this is perfect to restrict this. So then you would say, okay, everything that is not coming from my own domain in terms of JS, just not even try to fetch it and download it. And then you already safe against these types of attacks and similar ones. So the next one, next header that he goes over is for cookies, which is set cookie. This is fairly straightforward one. You can essentially disallow that third-party cookies are set at all. But the more interesting thing that you can do is you can allow when they're sent back essentially to the server.
In particular, this header has an option called same site, which allows you to specify which is your policy, or how do you want to regulate the cookies that you accept from other sites, none at all, or maybe all of them, or just some kind of middle ground between these two options.
Yeah, so you can, for example, restrict that if your site is linked somewhere, or if someone else serves an image from your site or a JavaScript or whatever, some resource, that, for example, in that case, there's no cookies sent over the wire. To restrict that essentially. That's pretty much it. This one personally, I found one of the more uninteresting ones, but still important. Should we go to the next one?
Yes. The next block of the talk is about data consumption and how affordable it is, which is, to be honest, something that I never really think about. I mean, you always think about security and stuff like that, but maybe how expensive is your website? It's something that, I
gotta say that I very much think about this, but the reason might be, I think this is also why he covers this in his talk, that in Germany, this is a big issue. Not sure about Spain, but also same here in Netherlands is not really an issue. In Germany, data contracts for your phone, regardless if it's prepaid or postpaid, are super expensive. Like in recent years, it gets a bit better. But traditionally, it's also a point that he made. You got I don't know, like a gigabyte for 10 euros or something ridiculous like this. And then, of course, if you hit a few sites that have 5 megabyte large JavaScript that do some fancy animations or something, you boost through this 1 gigabyte super quickly. So indeed, how to save data, and that you should also respect that certain users. Another point that he makes, for example, is if you're also on a slow connection or in an area of the world where internet is just not very good yet, like third world countries, for example. This is also very important, since you don't want to lose your user base there, and they might just, if it loads forever, or if they blow through all that limited data, it's very, very bad. So what's the next header that can solve this?
Well, the first point of all this, for example, would be what he actually talks about is to avoid making the same request over and over again, which means cache.
Yes.
There's a header
called cache control. This is one of the ones I personally knew and used already a lot. I think it's similar for some of our listeners. It's pretty straightforward. You can say, okay, this resource, typically images or style sheets that not going to change anyways, or likely not going to change very often at least. You can just specify they have a time to live of, a week, and then the browser should cache them and only ask again after a week. And so you save a lot of bandwidth for subsequent requests. There's a problem though, right? A catch.
Yes. Even if you do that, it's possible that your browser tries to validate the result, so it ends up doing the request anyway. So there's an option or an attribute which is called immutable, to make sure that this request doesn't happen.
Exactly. And then the next one he goes over is, as Nuria said already, in a very similar vein, which is for compression. So this is called Accept-Encoding, another more common one, which allows you to set that your server can serve resources compressed. The most common one here is gzip, which I guess many of you know. But there's also a less common one called Brotli, which has some downsides, but also big upsides.
Yes. Basically, the result of the compression is usually smaller. So it's more compressed. It's a small difference, but the point that he made is that if you scale this, the difference grows as well. So it might be very interesting to do.
Exactly. So this is something for small website owners that makes only a minuscule difference on paper. Then, though, you can still argue for user bases that are on slow or limited bandwidth. Still very important. But here he makes a nice anecdote, which I found very interesting, and it's mind-blowing almost. Wikipedia, for example, they did a press release some time ago. I mean, this talk is already a year old. That they shaved off 9 kilobytes of their JavaScript that they just serve on every Wikipedia page, which I also thought when he showed us, like, wow, 9 kilobytes, cool. But then if you scroll down a bit on the press release, they said that within the first month, and this is also forecast for the following months, they save 1.5 terabytes of transfer per month, which of course is huge for Wikipedia. I mean, they always ask for donations and stuff, so saving bandwidth for their where they host their servers is crazy if you see these 1.5 terabytes per month just for this tiny change.
Yes. Then he moves to talk about images and how can you optimize the usage and how you send images. First, he talks about the different image format, which is a bit smaller, called WebP.
Exactly.
And then there's a specific header that can help you optimizing this process of sending the images.
Yes. So the header to first of all configure which data formats or MIME types are used is, I think, the most common one. Accept, I think everyone saw that before, which, for example, can be used for WebP. And the other one that Nuria touched upon is called, which I also never heard of before, Accept-CH, which stands for client hints. And that's a very interesting feature. So what you can essentially do is in your first response from your server, so it's also a server-sided response header, you can specify, please send me client hints about some information. These are things like the pixel density of the client, the viewport size, stuff like this. So you would, in the first response of coming from a client, you would say, okay, in that every following request for the next n seconds or unlimited, send me your viewport size and pixel density. So what happens then if the client does this?
Basically, when you have this information, you know which of the version of the same image you have, it's better it's easier to use for this client in particular. And you can adjust the image you send based on this information. Yeah.
So to give us more example, if you requested from a mobile phone, the viewport is very small, of course, very narrow. Mm-hmm. So your mobile phone would send this, and then the server, if configured correctly, this is of course something you have to actively configure server-sided, you could only send a way smaller shrinked version of the same image because you know, okay, this viewport is only this big. Whereas if someone views it with a 70-inch TV, the viewport will be crazy big, or some retina display, for example. So you can send back a very high-scale, nice-looking image. But on the phone, this is kind of useless, right? Because it's going to be scaled down anyways. So you send much data over the wire without really any use or increase in fidelity. So I found this a very nice one to achieve this data saving aspect. Problem here is, compared to pretty much all of the previous ones, this is very cutting edge, he mentioned. So the support here is not very good yet. Pretty much all of the browsers have either hidden it behind feature flags or they just right out don't support it yet. But it is a standard, so we'll get better in the coming years, hopefully.
Yes. Then he talks about a request header called save data, which you can turn on in your browsers and some applications as well. But again, just like in the previous one, this is supported but hidden.
Yes, so this is one that is very similar to one we will see in a second as well, which I think many of you also know, do not track. So essentially you can just say, as the client, so as the response header, you can say, I want data saving, and then the server can react to it. It's also like optional, of course. And as Nuria said, the bigger problem is many or all of the major browsers do not even have this toggle very nicely shown somewhere, but you have to actively, really deeply in the settings search for it. But the idea generally is that you can have like a toggle and turn on data saving. And then, for example, the server supports this and sends you back, I don't know, only standard, or like doesn't use any fancy fonts anymore, or only sends you like half scaled images and stuff like this to, well, save data.
Yes, which, as you said, it's very important in certain, for example, when you travel to other countries or in some places that might have connection problems.
Yes. The next one can also speed up your website, although not necessarily save data, which is the preload header. And it does exactly what it sounds like. So you can specify on first response, for example, please preload the following resources. So if you have a website that has like a loading animation anyways, or some start page or something, you can say, please preload this font that I'm using on every page, this JavaScript that I'm using on every page, this logo that is displayed everywhere, stuff like this. So what this means, in the first few seconds, when you load the website, this is all preloaded, and then it can seem a bit faster visiting subsequent websites as you already have this.
Yes.
But that's pretty much it.
Then he moves to talk about the header called feature policy, which basically allows you to specify what is allowed and what is not. It is
very similar, I thought, to the CSP, content security policy, although it does something different. So it's not about where resources are allowed to come from, but which features are supported, right?
Some of the examples are, is it allowed to use the vibration of your phone or the geolocalization? Although he explains that it is very experimental still. But anyway, it is supported by most of the browsers.
Yes.
So that's nice.
And this is another common one, as he says, to, well, make your site more secure. So here, for example, you could, what Nuria just said, you could say, on my website, as long as you're there, it's never allowed to ask for a location. I mean, you all know this pop-up, this website wants to know your location. So you can just disable this globally for your whole website, which means that indeed, if you also get third-party stuff served from advertisements, from tracking, from whatever you might have there, even CDNs or something, if they do want to know location for whatever weird reason, it's just blocked immediately, and this pop-up also never shows up. So you can save your users from such stuff that you don't want to have in part of your website, which without this is actually not really possible. They can do it in JavaScript, but you have to manually do it, and this is a header that is already doing that for you.
Yes.
Indeed, though, very experimental, so also something that's only going to come similar to the client hints. And then there's one final one left, right?
Yes, you already talked about it. It's the do not track header, which can be enabled in the browser, but it didn't really work, right?
Yeah, it's similar to the save data one. You can essentially tell the server, please do not track me, but of course this is optional. There's like no law or something that binds you to this. So what happens that many servers just straight out don't respect it. So if you send like say do not track, they just discard it. Or he even shows an example of some sites actively using this as one other fingerprinting step to track people.
Yes.
So to use it together with viewport size or whatever as one other piece of information to keep track of who's visiting the site, which of course is exactly not what it's intended for.
Yes. What it's done now, since this didn't really work, it's basically to block certain types of tracking and some contents, because completely blocking the tracking, it's not possible, at least not yet.
Yes. And that pretty much concludes the talk, right?
Yes.
So what's your verdict?
I think it was a very interesting talk, also very useful, very dense as well. it was a bit difficult to follow it completely. We had to stop the video quite some times to refresh a bit, and
I agree. I also gotta say, this was, from all the many talks that I watched so far in my life, definitely one of the top-notch ones. Like, it was very nice, very concise, to the point, not much talking around. It was straight information. Indeed, that's exactly also my downside, though. If I'd be in the audience on this one in Berlin when this took place, where you cannot just pause the video for a second, there were some parts specifically about the client hints I found, and about the HSTS and CSP, so the first two ones, that he went over quite quickly. I know he had a 45-minute time cap for his talk, but there were some things that I think, could not really follow without pausing the video. Maybe it was just the two of us, but I think this, your mileage may vary, but I think this is my biggest downside of it. But it's not a big problem, specifically if you watch it on YouTube. Overall, it was awesome talk, I gotta say.
Yes.
And very, also nice stuff that you can actually use in your life, and not just like theoretical information.
Exactly, very practical.
Yeah, that's the term I was looking for.
Yes. Another thing that I liked is how, as I said, he shows how this can be used, or which browser supported, but also there was like an example with his own website where he showed how he used every single one of these headers. So that was nice as well to have, also as a recap of what he had explained.
It was a small demo of sorts.
Yeah, exactly. But in general, I think it's a very good talk. I think it's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah. So as always, you will find the link to the video in the show notes of this episode. And then finally, again, I can only reiterate, please visit our website, gist.fm, and send us some feedback, some reviews, whatever you want, and follow us on the social media and podcasting platform of your liking. And then I can only say thank you very much for listening, and see you in the next one.
Thank you.